3 years after exposing Rebecca Sterling's child trafficking operation, I thought Ocean City had purged its darkest secrets. I was wrong. The call that came from Ocean City High School on a cold January morning would lead me into a labyrinth of stolen identities, buried trauma, and a revenge plot 15 years in the making. I'm Emma Richardson, and this is the story of how I uncovered the truth about Sarah Matthews, a beloved substitute teacher who vanished without a trace, leaving behind a classroom full of confused students and a mystery that would shake our community to its core. The principal of Ocean City High School, Robert Henderson, was a respected figure in our community. He had been running the school for over 20 years and was known for his dedication to student welfare and academic excellence. When he called my office that Tuesday morning, his voice carried an urgency I had never heard before. Ms. Richardson, I need your help with a very delicate matter. One of our substitute teachers has disappeared, and we're concerned there may be legal implications. I agreed to meet with Henderson that afternoon. Ocean City High School was a sprawling brick building that had educated generations of local families. Henderson's office was lined with awards and photographs documenting decades of academic achievements and community service. Tell me about this substitute teacher, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Henderson pulled out a personnel file. Sarah Matthews. She's been working with us for about 8 months. The students loved her. She had a real gift for connecting with teenagers, especially the ones who were struggling academically or socially. When was she last seen? Friday afternoon. She was teaching a senior English class and everything seemed normal. But when she didn't show up for her Monday morning assignment, we tried to contact her. Her phone goes straight to voicemail, and her apartment manager says she hasn't been seen all weekend. I looked through Sarah's file. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with shoulder-length brown hair and kind eyes. Her background check was clean, and her references from previous schools were glowing. Have you contacted the police? That's where things get complicated, Henderson said, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. When we tried to verify Sarah's employment history with her previous schools, we discovered some discrepancies in her paperwork. We're concerned that she may not have been entirely truthful about her qualifications. This raised immediate red flags. A teacher with falsified credentials disappearing suddenly suggested she might have been running from something. What kind of discrepancies? Her teaching certificate appears to be fraudulent. The university she claimed to graduate from has no record of her attendance, and her previous employment references lead to schools that either don't exist or have never heard of her. I made notes while Henderson spoke. Mr. Henderson, I need to ask, have you noticed any unusual behavior from Sarah recently? Any signs that she might have been planning to leave? Henderson was quiet for a moment. Now that you mention it, there was something strange. Over the past few weeks, several students mentioned that Sarah had been asking them personal questions about their family situations, their home addresses, their social security numbers. She claimed it was for a college preparation project. My investigative instincts were screaming warning signals. A teacher with fake credentials asking students for personal information, then disappearing suddenly suggested something much more serious than employment fraud. Mr. Henderson, I think we need to involve the police immediately. This could be identity theft or something worse. That's exactly what I was afraid of. The last thing this school needs is a scandal involving student safety. I contacted Detective Sarah Kim and explained the situation. She agreed to begin an immediate investigation into Sarah Matthews' background and her interactions with students. While the police launched their investigation, I decided to speak with some of Sarah's students to better understand what had been happening in her classroom. I started with Jessica Parker, a senior who had been in several of Sarah's classes. Jessica was an intelligent girl from a troubled home situation, the kind of student who might be vulnerable to manipulation. Ms. Matthews was amazing, Jessica told me when we met at a local coffee shop. She really cared about us. She was helping me apply for colleges and scholarships. Jessica, do you remember her asking you for personal information? Yeah, but it was for the college applications. She said she needed my social security number and home address to help me fill out the financial aid forms. Did she ask other students for the same information? I think so. She was helping a lot of us with college prep. She said she had connections with admissions offices that could help us get accepted to schools we might not otherwise qualify for. This was sounding more and more like identity theft. Sarah had been using her position as a trusted teacher to collect personal information from vulnerable students. I spoke with several other students and heard similar stories. Sarah had been particularly focused on students from difficult family situations, kids who might not have strong support systems at home to monitor their activities or question unusual requests. But then I spoke with Maria Santos, a quiet junior who had been in Sarah's study hall. Ms. Matthews was different from other teachers, Maria said. She seemed to really understand what it was like to feel lost and alone. She told me that sometimes the families we're born into aren't the families we're meant to stay with. What do you mean by that? She said that some young people need to create new lives for themselves, away from people who don't understand or appreciate them. She said she could help students who wanted a fresh start. This was taking a disturbing turn. Sarah wasn't just collecting information for identity theft. She was potentially grooming vulnerable students to leave their families. I called Detective Kim with this new information. Emma, we've been looking into Sarah Matthews' background, and it gets stranger. The social security number she used on her employment application belongs to a woman who died in a car accident 5 years ago. And the apartment she was renting was paid for with cash. No credit cards or bank accounts in her name. So Sarah Matthews doesn't exist? Exactly. We have no idea who this woman really is, or what her intentions were with these students. Have you checked to see if any students have gone missing? That's our next step. We're contacting all the parents of students who had contact with Sarah to make sure their children are safe. While the police worked on identifying missing students, I decided to investigate Sarah's apartment. The landlord agreed to let me look around with Detective Kim present. Sarah's apartment was sparse but clean. There were few personal belongings, but what we found was revealing. In her bedroom closet, we discovered a box containing multiple sets of identification documents, driver's licenses, social security cards, and birth certificates, all with different names but bearing Sarah's photograph. She's been running a sophisticated identity theft operation, Detective Kim said, examining the documents. But why target high school students? In Sarah's desk, we found something even more disturbing: detailed profiles of over 20 students, including their family situations, financial status, and psychological assessments. Next to each profile were notes about the student's relocation potential and adaptation likelihood. She wasn't just stealing their identities, I realized. She was evaluating which students would be good candidates for disappearing entirely. We also found a notebook containing what appeared to be coded addresses and phone numbers. Some of the entries were marked with dates and dollar amounts, suggesting financial transactions. Detective Kim ran the addresses through police databases and discovered they led to locations across multiple states. When she contacted local authorities in those areas, she learned that several of the addresses were associated with missing person cases involving teenage girls. The scope of Sarah's operation was becoming clear. She wasn't working alone. She was part of a network that was systematically targeting vulnerable teenagers and helping them disappear into new lives. But the biggest revelation was yet to come. Detective Kim called me the next day with shocking news. Emma, we've identified Sarah Matthews' real identity. Her name is Michelle Porter, and she's been missing for 15 years. Missing from where? Right here in Ocean City. Michelle Porter was a student at Ocean City High School. She disappeared when she was 15 years old, and the case was never solved. My blood ran cold. Are you saying that Sarah Matthews is actually a missing child who's been operating under false identities for 15 years? That's exactly what I'm saying. And here's the most disturbing part. The principal who reported her disappearance to us, Robert Henderson, was the vice principal at Ocean City High School when Michelle Porter vanished. The implications hit me like a freight train. Henderson had been at the school when Michelle disappeared, and now she had returned as Sarah Matthews. Either this was an incredible coincidence, or Henderson was somehow connected to her original disappearance. I met with Detective Kim to review the old case file on Michelle Porter. The details were heartbreaking. Michelle had been a troubled teenager from an abusive home. She had been struggling academically and socially, and had frequently been sent to the vice principal's office for disciplinary issues. According to the file, Henderson had been working closely with Michelle to address her behavioral problems. He had even arranged for her to receive special counseling and tutoring to help her get back on track. Michelle had last been seen leaving school on a Friday afternoon in October 2008. Her family reported her missing when she didn't come home, but given her history of running away, police initially treated it as a routine runaway case. The investigation had stalled when no trace of Michelle could be found. Her family eventually moved away from Ocean City, and the case went cold. Detective Kim, I think we need to take a very close look at Robert Henderson's role in Michelle's original disappearance. I agree, but we need to be careful. Henderson is a respected member of the community, and we can't make accusations without solid evidence. While Detective Kim worked on obtaining warrants to investigate Henderson more thoroughly, I decided to dig into his background myself. What I found was deeply troubling. Over the past 20 years, Henderson had been at Ocean City High School during the disappearances of at least 6 female students. All of them had been troubled teenagers from difficult family situations. All of them had been receiving special attention from Henderson for academic or behavioral problems, and all of them had vanished without a trace. Even more disturbing, I discovered that Henderson had been involved in placing several students in alternative educational programs, residential facilities in other states that were supposed to help troubled teenagers get their lives back on track. But when I tried to verify these programs, I found that many of them had no record of the students Henderson claimed to have placed there. I was beginning to suspect that Henderson had been systematically identifying vulnerable students and either kidnapping them directly or facilitating their disappearance through this network of fake programs. But if Michelle Porter had escaped or been released from this network, why had she returned to Ocean City? And why had she been collecting information on current students? The answer came when Detective Kim obtained a warrant to search Henderson's office and home. In Henderson's home office, they found detailed files on dozens of students spanning his entire career at Ocean City High School. The files contained psychological profiles, family assessments, and recommendations for alternative placement. Next to many of the files were notes indicating dates and locations where the students had been transferred. They also found correspondence with individuals in other states who appeared to be running residential facilities for troubled teenagers. The letters discussed placement fees and special handling requirements for specific students. We also found a notebook containing what appeared to be coded addresses and phone numbers. Some of the entries were marked with dates and dollar amounts, suggesting financial transactions. Detective Kim ran the addresses through police databases and discovered they led to locations across multiple states. When she contacted local authorities in those areas, she learned that several of the addresses were associated with missing person cases involving teenage girls. The scope of Sarah's operation was becoming clear. She wasn't working alone. She was part of a network that was systematically targeting vulnerable teenagers and helping them disappear into new lives. But the biggest revelation was yet to come. Detective Kim called me the next day with shocking news. Emma, we've identified Sarah Matthews's real identity. Her name is Michelle Porter, and she's been missing for 15 years. Missing from where? Right here in Ocean City. Michelle Porter was a student at Ocean City High School. She disappeared when she was 15 years old, and the case was never solved. My blood ran cold. Are you saying that Sarah Matthews is actually a missing child who's been operating under false identities for 15 years? That's exactly what I'm saying. And here's the most disturbing part. The principal who reported her disappearance to us, Robert Henderson, was the vice principal at Ocean City High School when Michelle Porter vanished. The implications hit me like a freight train. Henderson had been at the school when Michelle disappeared, and now she had returned as Sarah Matthews. Either this was an incredible coincidence, or Henderson was somehow connected to her original disappearance. I met with Detective Kim to review the old case file on Michelle Porter. The details were heartbreaking. Michelle had been a troubled teenager from an abusive home. She had been struggling academically and socially, and had frequently been sent to the vice principal's office for disciplinary issues. According to the file, Henderson had been working closely with Michelle to address her behavioral problems. He had even arranged for her to receive special counseling and tutoring to help her get back on track. Michelle had last been seen leaving school on a Friday afternoon in October 2008. Her family reported her missing when she didn't come home, but given her history of running away, police initially treated it as a routine runaway case. The investigation had stalled when no trace of Michelle could be found. Her family eventually moved away from Ocean City, and the case went cold. Detective Kim, I think we need to take a very close look at Robert Henderson's role in Michelle's original disappearance. I agree, but we need to be careful. Henderson is a respected member of the community, and we can't make accusations without solid evidence. While Detective Kim worked on obtaining warrants to investigate Henderson more thoroughly, I decided to dig into his background myself. What I found was deeply troubling. Over the past 20 years, Henderson had been at Ocean City High School during the disappearances of at least 6 female students. All of them had been troubled teenagers from difficult family situations. All of them had been receiving special attention from Henderson for academic or behavioral problems, and all of them had vanished without a trace. Even more disturbing, I discovered that Henderson had been involved in placing several students in alternative educational programs, residential facilities in other states that were supposed to help troubled teenagers get their lives back on track. But when I tried to verify these programs, I found that many of them had no record of the students Henderson claimed to have placed there. I was beginning to suspect that Henderson had been systematically identifying vulnerable students and either kidnapping them directly or facilitating their disappearance through this network of fake programs. But if Michelle Porter had escaped or been released from this network, why had she returned to Ocean City? And why had she been collecting information on current students? The answer came when Detective Kim obtained a warrant to search Henderson's office and home. In Henderson's home office, they found detailed files on dozens of students spanning his entire career at Ocean City High School. The files contained psychological profiles, family assessments, and recommendations for alternative placement. Next to many of the files were notes indicating dates and locations where the students had been transferred. They also found correspondence with individuals in other states who appeared to be running residential facilities for troubled teenagers. The letters discussed placement fees and special handling requirements for specific students. But the case also showed me the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Michelle Porter had endured years of exploitation and abuse, but instead of simply seeking to rebuild her own life, she had risked everything to expose Henderson's crimes and protect other potential victims. Her courage in returning to Ocean City and gathering evidence against her abuser helped bring justice not only for herself, but for dozens of other victims who might never have seen their cases resolved otherwise. The case taught me that healing from trauma sometimes requires confronting the source of that trauma, even when doing so puts survivors at risk. Michelle's decision to return to Ocean City wasn't just about revenge, it was about ensuring that no other children would suffer the way she had suffered. Today, 6 years after Henderson's conviction, Ocean City High School has implemented comprehensive programs to support vulnerable students and prevent exploitation. Michelle Porter continues her work helping trafficking victims and has become a powerful advocate for survivors' rights. The Henderson trafficking network was completely dismantled, and several other administrators and facility operators in multiple states were convicted of related crimes. The case led to federal legislation strengthening oversight of residential programs for troubled teenagers. As I reflect on the Michelle Porter case, I'm struck by how easily Henderson was able to operate for so many years without detection. His crimes were hidden in plain sight, disguised as efforts to help troubled students. The case reinforced my belief that protecting vulnerable populations requires constant vigilance and systematic safeguards, not just trust in individual good intentions. It also showed me that sometimes the greatest heroes are those who transform their own victimization into a mission to protect others. Michelle Porter could have simply disappeared forever after escaping from Henderson's network. Instead, she chose to risk her safety and her freedom to ensure that justice was served. Her courage not only brought down a dangerous predator, but also provided closure and healing for dozens of other survivors. The substitute teacher who disappeared had indeed been living a hidden life, but not the life of a criminal. She had been living the life of a survivor who refused to let her abuser continue harming others. Her disappearance wasn't an escape from justice, but a strategic retreat that ultimately led to justice being served. But the Michelle Porter case was far from over. As the investigation into Henderson's network deepened, we discovered that his operation had been even more extensive than we initially realized. The trafficking ring had connections that reached into multiple states and involved dozens of co-conspirators. 3 months after Henderson's arrest, I received a disturbing phone call from Detective Kim. "Emma, we've got a problem. 2 of the victims who testified against Henderson have disappeared." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean disappeared?" Jennifer Walsh and Thomas Chen, both former students who had been trafficked by Henderson's network. They were supposed to check in with their victim advocates yesterday, but nobody's heard from them. This was my worst fear. Despite our efforts to protect the witnesses, someone connected to Henderson's network was eliminating people who could testify about the broader conspiracy. Do we have any leads on who might have taken them? That's where it gets complicated. We've been monitoring communications from several of the trafficking facilities we identified, and there's been a lot of chatter about cleaning up loose ends and protecting the operation. I met with Detective Kim at the police station to review what we knew about the broader network. The scope was staggering. Over the past 2 decades, Henderson's operation had placed vulnerable teenagers in facilities across 15 states. These facilities masqueraded as therapeutic boarding schools or residential treatment centers, but they were actually fronts for a sophisticated trafficking operation. The network had been careful to target teenagers who were unlikely to be missed, kids from abusive homes, those in the foster care system, or those with histories of running away. They would forge documents showing that these children had been voluntarily placed in residential treatment, making their disappearances appear legitimate. But now that Henderson had been exposed, the entire network was scrambling to cover their tracks, and that meant eliminating anyone who could expose the full scope of their crimes. I decided I needed to speak with Michelle Porter directly. She had been placed in protective custody after Henderson's arrest, but I knew she would have insights into how the network operated and who the key players were. Michelle was staying in a safe house about an hour outside of Ocean City. When I arrived, I found her working on a laptop, surrounded by files and documents. Despite everything she had endured, she was still focused on helping other victims. "Emma, I'm glad you're here," she said when I entered. "I've been trying to map out all the connections in Henderson's network, and I think I know who's behind the recent disappearances." She showed me a complex diagram she had created, showing the relationships between various facilities, administrators, and financial backers of the trafficking operation. "The person running the network isn't Henderson," she explained. "He was just a regional coordinator. The real boss is someone much more powerful, someone with connections in law enforcement, politics, and the legal system." "Who?" Michelle pointed to a name at the center of her diagram. "Judge Patricia Morrison. She's been using her position on the family court bench to facilitate the trafficking operation for over 20 years. Judge Morrison was one of the most respected jurists in our state. She had been presiding over family court cases for decades and had a reputation for being tough but fair in custody disputes and juvenile cases." "Michelle, that's a very serious accusation. What evidence do you have?" When I was held in the various facilities, I kept detailed notes about everything I observed. I noticed that all of our placements came with court orders signed by Judge Morrison. She was the one authorizing our removal from our families and our placement in these supposed treatment facilities. Michelle showed me copies of court documents she had managed to obtain over the years. Every single child who had been trafficked through Henderson's network had been placed there through a court order signed by Judge Morrison. But how was she able to do this without other people in the legal system noticing? Because she was very careful about which cases she handled personally. She would only take cases involving children who had no advocates, kids in foster care, those with absent or abusive parents, or those whose families couldn't afford lawyers. And she always made sure the facilities were located in other states, so local authorities wouldn't be able to easily monitor what was happening to the children. The implications were staggering. If Michelle was right, Judge Morrison had been using her judicial authority to facilitate the trafficking of hundreds of children over 2 decades, but proving it would be incredibly difficult. Morrison was a sitting judge with decades of legal experience and powerful connections throughout the state government. I shared Michelle's suspicions with Detective Kim, who agreed to begin a discreet investigation into Morrison's background and her connection to the trafficking facilities. What we found was deeply troubling. Over the past 20 years, Judge Morrison had issued thousands of court orders placing children in residential facilities. While this might seem normal for a family court judge, the pattern was suspicious. She consistently chose facilities that were located far from the children's home communities, and she rarely ordered follow-up monitoring to ensure the children's welfare. Even more concerning, we discovered that Morrison had significant financial investments in several companies that owned or operated residential treatment facilities. She had been profiting directly from the placement of children in these facilities. Morrison nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll turn myself in tomorrow morning. But I need you to promise me something. If anything happens to me, make sure this information gets to the right people. Don't let my death be for nothing." The next morning, Judge Morrison walked into the FBI field office in Ocean City and surrendered herself. She spent the next 12 hours providing detailed testimony about the trafficking network and the medical experimentation programs. Her information led to coordinated raids on facilities in 15 states. Over 200 children and young adults were rescued from various forms of captivity and exploitation. Many of them had been subjected to experimental treatments that had left them with permanent psychological and physical damage. The scope of the conspiracy was unprecedented. The investigation ultimately led to the arrests of 47 individuals, including doctors, researchers, facility administrators, and government officials. The network had been operating for over 30 years and had victimized thousands of children. But Morrison never got the chance to see justice served. 3 days after she turned herself in, she was found dead in her jail cell. The official cause of death was listed as suicide, but many people suspected that she had been murdered to prevent her from providing additional testimony. The evidence Morrison provided was enough to convict most of the network's key players, but her death meant that some aspects of the conspiracy would never be fully understood. The medical experimentation program was particularly disturbing. Documents recovered from the facilities showed that researchers had been conducting psychological conditioning experiments designed to create completely compliant subjects. They had been using a combination of drugs, psychological manipulation, and surgical procedures to alter the personalities and memories of their victims. Michelle Porter had been one of the subjects in these experiments, which explained why she had initially had difficulty remembering details about her early captivity. The researchers had been trying to erase her memories of her original family and create new memories that would make her believe she belonged with her captors. The fact that Michelle had been able to recover her memories and maintain her sense of identity was a testament to her incredible psychological resilience. The trials of the network conspirators took nearly 3 years to complete. Most of the defendants received life sentences, though some were able to negotiate plea deals in exchange for providing information about other victims. The medical research institutions that had funded the experiments were shut down, and their assets were seized to provide compensation for victims. Several pharmaceutical companies faced massive lawsuits and regulatory sanctions for their involvement in the illegal research. For Michelle Porter, the exposure of the full network brought a sense of closure she had been seeking for years. She was finally able to understand the full scope of what had been done to her and to see that justice was served for all the victims. "It's not just about getting revenge," Michelle told me after the final convictions were handed down. "It's about making sure that no other child has to go through what we went through." Michelle continued her work helping trafficking victims, but she also became an advocate for stricter oversight of residential treatment facilities for children. Her experiences had shown her how easily these institutions could be used to exploit vulnerable children. The case led to significant reforms in how children are placed in residential facilities. New laws required more thorough background checks for facility operators, regular inspections by independent monitors, and stronger legal protections for children who report abuse. The Ocean City case also sparked a federal investigation into similar networks in other parts of the country. Over the following years, several other trafficking rings were discovered and dismantled, rescuing hundreds of additional victims. As I reflect on the Michelle Porter case 7 years later, I'm struck by how easily this massive conspiracy was able to operate for so many years. The traffickers had used legitimate institutions, schools, courts, and treatment facilities, as cover for their crimes. They had exploited the trust that society places in these institutions to victimize the most vulnerable members of our community. But the case also showed me the incredible power of survivors who refused to remain silent. Michelle Porter could have simply tried to rebuild her own life after escaping from the network. Instead, she chose to risk her safety to expose her abusers and help other victims. Her courage not only brought down Henderson and Morrison, but also led to the discovery of a conspiracy that was far larger and more sinister than anyone had imagined. Without her willingness to return to Ocean City and gather evidence, hundreds of children might still be trapped in the network's facilities. The case taught me that healing from trauma sometimes requires confronting the systems that allowed that trauma to occur. Michelle's fight wasn't just against individual abusers, but against the institutional failures that had enabled those abusers to operate with impunity for so many years. Today, Michelle continues to work with law enforcement agencies to identify and rescue trafficking victims. She has become a nationally recognized expert on institutional abuse and has helped develop training programs for professionals who work with vulnerable children. The residential facilities that were part of the trafficking network have been permanently closed, and their former locations have been converted into legitimate treatment centers that provide genuine therapeutic services for children in need. Ocean City High School has implemented comprehensive safeguards to protect students from exploitation, and Robert Henderson's former office has been converted into a resource center for students who need support and advocacy. The substitute teacher who disappeared lives on as an advocate, a survivor, and a hero who refused to let evil triumph over good. Her story reminds us that sometimes the greatest act of courage is refusing to remain silent in the face of injustice. Michelle Porter's journey from victim to survivor to advocate shows us that even the most traumatic experiences can be transformed into a force for positive change. Her willingness to confront her past and fight for justice has helped ensure that countless other children will never have to endure what she endured. The case continues to influence how we think about child protection, institutional oversight, and the responsibility we all share to protect the most vulnerable members of our society. It serves as a reminder that vigilance and courage are required to prevent those in positions of trust from exploiting the children in their care.